Welcome to another edition of What Would Aaron Say? I'm Aaron. This is what I say.
I have already given this video out numerous times before it was even finished being edited because there were so many people asking for help with nodes. And so I said, well, here's the video, just don't give it out, but this will get you started. So that's exactly what this is. This is to get you started. Regardless of where you are in the world, how much money you have to throw at therapy, or whatever, you can at least understand what you've got, how you got them, how not to make them worse, and how to make them better. That's basically what this is. If you need to jump to the exercises you need to do, just click this for the exercises and it'll take you to them. If you would like to go to the interview section, then just click this. But if you really want to know everything there is to know, which I certainly recommend, then watch the whole thing, which starts now.
Alright, so today we're going to tackle probably the most famous vocal injury that most people, even non-singers, have heard of, nodules, vocal nodes. So what is it is probably a good place to start. Basically, if you've ever raked leaves or lifted weights for any length of time, you know what nodes are made of. It's callousing, basically. But because the cords are covered in a mucous membrane, which is basically like the inside of your cheek, that kind of skin, it doesn't callus exactly the same way, and there's different layers to the cords. So the outside layer starts to toughen. Now, if it toughens over a large portion of the cord, we call that mid-fold thickening, and sometimes that's actually the result of not just the surface getting tough, but like injuries inside the cord, like hemorrhages, that when they heal, they start to bulk the cord up as they create scar tissue. But if they happen in a very specific place, usually near the front third of the cords, those are nodes. And they usually come in pairs, not always, but almost always. And they usually take about as long to get rid of as they took to get. So if someone's been doing something for years and years and years and years, and they have gotten nodes over that period of time, the response to therapy isn't usually as great as if they've only been doing it for 3 months. Like they did a show, they did something during that show repetitively that caused the callousing, and now we can spend 3 to 6 months getting rid of it. That usually works. The cause of vocal nodules is basically swelling that has been maintained over a period of time and specifically been sung on some more or yelled on some more, usually at an elevated pitch, often with a raised larynx. The raising of the larynx is usually in response to the fried sound that's becoming more common due to the swelling in that area. The raising of the larynx also makes it more likely that you're going to be chestier, which also puts more strain on the cords. So chestiness, usually with a raised larynx, and usually in tandem with an elevated volume, maintained over a long period of time, is the perfect recipe for nodes. If the part of the cords that you're belting on a lot is getting swollen and staying swollen, then the body very wisely decides we should toughen this up so that it doesn't bleed or blow out or whatever. So in a sense, nodes are a brilliant solution to what is going on. It's not a desirable one, but I mean, it works. It prevents the things from getting much worse. So that's why a lot of people, when they have scar tissue all over the cords, they don't really get much worse. There are certain rock singers who have a raspiness, and people often ask me why don't they lose their voice, and it's because after your cords have gotten a certain layer of toughness on them, they don't tend to get any worse. Michael Bolton, Pink, Bryan Adams, those kind of people, there's just a raspiness to the voice because the surface of the cords has become a little bit toughened, and just like the bottoms of your feet, you don't tend to build calluses on calluses. Once you've got a layer of that, that's all you need. That is not the same thing as having nodes, though. That's just a general toughening of the cord. Having nodes is really having these pinpoint spots on the cords that have become calloused. The problem is, as the nodes build up, the cords are not able to completely seal because these little nodes are preventing a complete seal. Because of that, every time the cords come together, they're not sealing completely, and as a result of that, there's breath getting through all the time. That is why one of the chief things that you'll note about someone with nodules is there tends to be a breathiness in certain parts of the voice that they can't help unless they just really yell through it, and that's usually where it comes from. Teachers, there's a thing called teachers' nodes, where people who are yelling in a classroom consistently at a higher level, if they're talking like this all the time, eventually the cords start to toughen up in those little spots. That can be problematic because that's their job and they've got to do that all year round, and a break in the summer isn't always enough to make that go away. So sometimes we have to get a microphone for a teacher or teach them how to do nonverbal signals, get a whistle to quiet the class down, things like that. So elevated pitch at elevated volume, and often there's an elevated larynx. So you could be loud and at a high pitch with a lower larynx and you'll be a little less susceptible to it. The reason that raising your larynx figures into this at all is that when you raise your larynx, you are shortening the tube that is your instrument. And when you do that, you raise the pitch at which all of your transitions are going to occur. That's why little kids raise their chin when they're trying to sing the high notes in Tomorrow. It helps them to stay in their lower register. There's a sort of way of thinking that some people are node makers and some people are polyp makers. We're going to get on polyps in a later What Would Aaron Say. Some people tend to blow out into a blood blister, while other people tend to just create toughened skin. And I can't say that one is worse than the other, because they both have a completely different path to fixing them. You have to remove the stressors that caused it to begin with in order to get this process reversed. On top of that, it's a great idea to do the most opposite thing from what you've been doing. So if you've been yelling with an elevated larynx, at an elevated volume, at an elevated pitch, then doing something really, really yawny that is really, really heady, dragged down to lower notes is a really good way to go. That usually is the process, and in a second we're going to talk to a friend of mine, Emily, who's going to help us show what this is all about. Here we are with our friend Emily, who's going to help us out today with our exploration of nodules. So let's talk a little bit about your history first. Were you ever diagnosed with nodules?
Yes.
Hey Aaron, it's Andrew. I have a question. What's the difference between nodes and nodules?
A U and an L. That's it. They're the same thing. They're interchangeable terms. People call them nodes and nodules interchangeably, although some doctors who are not vocologists, they're not experts at this, they're just ENTs who are used to treating colds and things, they'll go in and they'll see something and they'll call it nodes when it isn't. I've seen a lot of cases of polyps being misdiagnosed as nodules. So if the doctor doesn't feel really, really sure about what's going on, see another one. How long ago was that?
That was in 2007, and I'm not good at math.
It was before now.
Like before now.
Before now.
Hey Aaron, can anyone get nodes?
It is possible, because in this universe all kinds of things are possible. It is not likely, however, that adult males get nodules. We tend to see them in females and in prepubescent boys. Sometimes guys in high school, even while their voices are still changing, if they're performing a lot, I'll see nodules in those cases. But past that, most guys are out of the woods. But then you said that it wasn't like full-blown, like hard, long-time nodules. They were like soft nodules, right? So soft nodules are basically the skin hasn't been irritated so long, so much that it's gotten really, really hard. They're soft. That means they're easier to go away.
Should people have surgery for nodes?
Typically, no. I have not been happy with the surgeries I've seen on nodules because very often they have to take away good skin. Surgery on polyps and pseudocysts, that's pretty successful. But you always, always try therapy first for nodules because that's the best hope of fixing it. If that fails, after 6 months, maybe even a year, if that fails, then cutting on it is probably the only other option. But you should always, always try therapy first. The problem is a lot of doctors talk the patient into the recovery period being shorter than what the voice therapy seems like it would be. So they're like, oh, the recovery is 3 months, whereas it might take 6 months to a year of therapy. And they think that they're saving themselves time. But I've seen cases where they try to go for that, and then there's basically a complete loss of certain parts of the voice. There's a hissy spot, usually around the notes that they have been belting, so like the A's and B flats and B's. Those notes tend to get hissy and they stay hissy, and sometimes there's not anything they can do after that surgery. So you should always try to do the therapy first. Exhaust your therapy options first. Therapy would include lifestyle changes, voice use changes, just a general change in your consciousness and how you're using your voice.
Hey Aaron, are nodes permanent?
Nodes are not permanent, no. Generally speaking, you can always affect some change. What you don't know is how much. Some people who've had them for a long, long time, some people have had them since infancy, and we don't always see huge changes with therapy on those cases. But almost always, I will actually go so far as to say always, I always see at least some change. Whether we can make that tissue more pliable, that's an improvement. Even if the nodes don't themselves shrink, we can at least change the quality of that skin. Normally the rule of thumb is it takes about as long to go away as it took to get them. So if you did like 3 months in a show that kind of built that up, probably in 3 months you can get rid of them. And you are a voice professional, meaning you use your voice all the time. In what ways? Like, what do you do?
I do musical theater, I do theater, I act on TV and film, I do a lot of emceeing and hosting live.
In some very loud places.
Yes, nightclubs and bars, very noisy late night events.
How fast can someone get nodes?
Well, I've never had a contest for it, although some summer camps seem to be attempting that, with kids just belting their faces off to see who can belt higher. But generally speaking, I would say a month is about the fastest I've ever seen that kind of response. If someone is doing a really intense, really yelly show, in about a month's time, I can sometimes see some nodular buildup. But usually those things only qualify as like a pre-nodular condition, or they'll call them soft nodes or something like that. There's a lot of really cutesy terms that doctors will use to not freak out the patient. But what you're looking at is what is happening, what is going on. Are these things getting bigger or are they going away? That's what you want to start tracking, and that's why sometimes when you're in this process, I like to have a monthly check-in to see, are we getting response? Are we getting better? Although a really good voice therapist will be able to tell you that just from the sound. You'll be able to tell that from the sound. If you were able to sing quieter without hiss, if you're able to sing higher and go into your head voice or flageolet registers and they don't cut out on you, you'll know you're getting improvement. So usually the high notes and how quiet you can sing are the biggest indicators that things are getting better. But if you want cold hard proof and you've got fierce insurance, go ahead and get scoped again in the next month, and then usually at the 3-month mark, you'll have a really great idea about whether you've got complete resolution on the way or whether they're a little resistant to change. So how did you know you had trouble that you needed to fix?
I had just come back from doing 2 musicals out of town, and I scheduled a one-night concert for myself in the city, sort of like a welcome back to New York, Emily's here again, hire her thing. And it didn't go well. And one of my very dear friends who had directed me in something years before came to see it, and after the show said, "I'm worried about your voice. I think you should go have it looked at."
Wow.
And nobody wants to hear that, and most people would never have the guts to tell you that, but I was so grateful that someone was honest with me, because, usually people are like, "Oh, you're amazing, I love you, you're so fierce," and meanwhile I'm like a quarter tone flat for an hour and a half.
Do you have to get scoped to diagnose nodes? Is there a way to tell without it?
A really good voice technician can usually tell if it's nodes because you can evaluate the behavior of that person, what they've been doing lately, how they sing, and then the voice quality. You can't always rule out other factors, though. Sometimes I've heard cases where I thought it was nodular, and then it turned out to be a sort of combination of things. They had a pseudocyst, and they were building nodes on the other cord. So you can't always be sure that it's only nodes. But it's usually very easy to spot a person who's got the syndrome. They're singing loudly at an elevated pitch, with a raised larynx, and very often they have a breathing system that involves the upper abs, which, go back and watch the breathing video for the belting, and that will help with that. The clenching of the upper abs also tends to make the throat really tight, which does also contribute to the tendency towards nodule development. So there are some people who don't have health insurance, and they say, "Can you tell me if I have nodes?" And I'll say, well, we're going to do the rehab exercises anyway, because no matter what you had, these are good things to do. And if they start to find a lot of response to those, then it's a good bet that's what it was. If they don't get much response after doing these, then we really do need to get scoped to see if either these are just the kinds of nodes that aren't responding, or if it's an entirely other problem. If you do a year of therapy and there is no change whatsoever, then I would probably go consider the surgery option, unless the sound you're getting is fine for you. So generally we think of people needing to get help when their nodules get so inflamed that they can't make the sounds they need to make or they want to make. If you've got a raspy sound and that's your thing and it's not getting any worse and you can sustain that and that's what you like, there's no reason to change that. Usually it's people who've been belting, and then one of their belt notes starts to get raspy, and so they respond by getting a little louder, raising their larynx a little bit more, and then clamping down a little bit more, and that cleans it up. But then a month later, it gets raspier, and they have to do it even further, and raise even more, and blow even harder. And you can see that that's a cycle that's eventually going to get way out of control. So that's a syndrome that we tend to see in people who are developing nodes, is that they are hiding it and hiding it and hiding it, and then eventually it gets to a point where they can't hide it anymore. And by that point, things are usually such a big deal, it's going to take some real time to fix. So I recommend getting scoped.
So you went and got it checked out, and they told you what?
So on my left vocal fold, I have, you can see this sort of like lump. And on the other side, there's like sort of like an irritation, callus sort of thing going on.
Are nodes the worst thing that can happen?
No, nodes are not the worst thing that can happen. There are far, far, far worse things. There's a lot of people who go, oh, I've got nodes, and they get really distraught. And that is just that's not really appropriate. Of all the things there are to go wrong with the voice, nodes are some of the most successful recoveries. There is a much higher incidence of recurrence, though, with people who have nodules. So they basically have to change their life forever in order to keep them away, because usually if they go back to a show and go back to their old habits, they'll get the same problem over again.
I had actually never had my voice scoped until this time. I've been singing my whole life. So it was almost kind of like a blessing that this happened, because I was forced to learn so much more about how it all works.
Well, in fact, it is my encouragement to anyone who's starting a show to get scoped before you start it. In fact, there's sort of movement lately to hold shows responsible for the injuries that may occur. Like if you got scoped and you go into Wicked and then you're injured, you can prove that that happened on the job.
Right.
So it's kind of a good strategy in general for people to get scoped before you do your shows.
That's smart.
Yeah. It's you know, the dancers, like, they're like, oh yeah, go get therapy, but singers are like, oh, just you should be fine, just sing through it. They don't get the same treatment, and so that's an issue for another day. We'll deal with that. Then you did voice therapy, and it got better, right?
Yeah, I did like a whole sort of rehaul. I did 2 weeks of voice rest while I did a steroid thing.
The Medrol dose pack.
That
yes,
one.
Yeah.
Do people need to go on voice rest for nodes?
You know, I have a lot of people who say to me that their doctor diagnosed them with nodules, and now they need to go on a month or 6 weeks of voice rest. That is insane. Generally, you never want to go on voice rest for longer than about a week. In some rare instances with a hemorrhage, you might need to go longer just to wait on that blood to drain out. You can't stay on voice rest for a month without losing an enormous amount of strength. And so that's the general thought, is the benefit doesn't outweigh the loss. With nodules, you basically want to undertake a little bit of voice rest to get the swelling down. If you've been yelling in a show, if the cords are red, if there's a sort of bloodshotness about them, go on vocal rest until that subsides, because any singing that you do while the cords are still swollen is really just going to contribute to more nodule building. So, a week at the most. If your doctor's telling you you need to be quiet for a month, call me. We'll figure out a better doctor for you.
I also had acid reflux, so I was addressing that, which I had never known that I had.
Can acid reflux cause nodes?
So, acid reflux is a contributor to vocal swelling. Anything that contributes to vocal swelling will tend to add to the node building problem. So yes, if you're trying to get rid of nodules, seeing that you are not having reflux, you're not clearing your throat excessively. The clearing of the throat, a lot of people misunderstand the skin on their cords as mucus. And they clear their throat and clear their throat and clear their throat. And I ask them, is the clearing of your throat actually fixing it? And if it isn't, stop. Because what you're doing is misunderstanding what's on your cord. You think there's a piece of mucus there, and it's not, it's skin. So the clearing of the throat has to be stopped. The removal of glottal onsets in speech, which we show in this video, has to be seen to. And the general environment, like if you're in a dry environment, chances are you're squeezing your cords and having more friction in your cords than normal. Whereas if you have a humidifier, or at least a humid enough environment, your cords are going to stay well lubricated and they're going to have less stress, less friction. And so the skin will be less likely to build up nodules.
Hey Aaron, does using your nose prevent nodes?
Using the nose is definitely going to take some pressure off of the chords. And it is certainly one of the therapies that we use in people who have gotten nodes. We often refer to it as resonance therapy or resonance exploitation, which is really what it's about. It's about trying to get the nose to make volume for you instead of blowing so hard at the chords. So the nose is definitely part of the solution, but I cannot say that just involving your nose is going to guarantee that you're not going to get this, because you could use your nose and still be loud and still raise your larynx and still drag your chest voice up. It's dragging up recipes relentlessly that tends to be the cause. Nodes are a repetitive stress injury. So if your voice has a lot of variety, if the show you're in or the concerts you're doing have a lot of variety to them, then you're likely to have a much healthier voice in the long run. What's funny is you would think that roles like Elphaba would be very prone to nodules. No. The people who are singing those kinds of roles are singing so much higher than the typical belter that they're experiencing longer chords. I've yet to run into an Elphaba who isn't doing that sort of extended belt with longer chords. It's the people who can only belt to a C or a C sharp. Those are your candidates for nodes. People who are not letting the chords get any longer past a certain point and they're just yelling up to their C, C sharps, and Ds. The really, really high belters, generally speaking, tend to face hemorrhages. That's what they get. They don't tend to get nodes. So we're going to go through a basic set of rehab exercises that you at home can do if you think you've got nodes, or just basic vocal care in general. So the first thing we do is we look at language patterns. Removing glottal attacks is really the first thing you look at. Glottal attack, or hard onset, is when you say uh-oh, that's two of them in a row. So basically, words that start with vowels. So we start with the 5 vowels. So you're going to go A, E, I, O, U, with no at the beginning. So it's not A, E, I, it's A, E, I, O, U. Give it a try.
A, E, I, O, U.
So O is a little rough, so separate them. A, E, I, O, U.
A, E, I, O, U.
Good. There's a little on the U.
Yeah.
U, give me the U again.
Ooh.
Good. So then you try words that start with vowels that you say frequently. So, already.
Already.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
So try this idea on. Try an invisible H. So you don't have to be so tenuous at the beginning. So, okay. It's like an invisible H.
Okay.
There you go. Every time.
Every time.
Everybody.
Everybody.
I don't know.
I don't know.
That's the big one. People always go, and that, it's all the time. The end-all be-all is to do sentences where the words all begin with vowels. The most hateful one I have ever found is, an ape ate an apple in an attic. And the notion here is to say each of those words separately. An ape ate an apple in an attic. Those are some pitfalls I'm telling you right now. Give it a try. We'll work through it. I'll be there with you.
And...
Good. That way, Anne was good.
Yeah. An ape.
So, invisible H. Ape.
Ape.
Yeah, that's better.
Ate an apple in an attic.
Good. Now, that is clearly time-consuming and quite difficult. So, the other thing that you can do is try eliding it together. So, like, you know how, like, Italians talk like this, it all kind of run it together. So, an ape ate an apple in an attic.
An ape ate an apple in an attic.
Right. So, if you had to tell somebody something, and you could do it all in one string of words, that's far better to do. That is always what you want to try. So, trying to have your thought composed, take your breath, say it all in one string of things, as opposed to an ape ate an apple in an attic. An ape ate an apple in an attic is totally glottal free. So that's what we're looking for. So that's the speech adjustments. So then we get into singing rehab. So this is sort of above what a speech language pathologist will cover. So you take basically an E on an E note, and you slide back and forth on the kind of smiley E that includes the cheeks. So it's and you're literally trying to get as quiet as you can get. There will come a point where it starts to cut out on you, especially if you're in the middle of having nodes already.
So you basically want to try to get as quiet as you can get without it cutting out on you, which may not be that quiet at first, but this is going to be your measuring stick for how well it's going. In a month, you're going to notice you can get much quieter. You can even record yourself so you can compare. So you're going to try basically sliding between those two pitches, E, with a smile, getting gradually quieter. Ideally, the getting quieter happens on each upward slide, and then you stay that quiet, and then you get even quieter, and then even quieter, and even quieter. Give it a try. Very good. So cut it out a little bit. So you were starting at like a volume of maybe 2 out of 10. Go ahead and start at like a 4 or 5, so you have some room to move. And then after you do the E, you can try it higher. The higher you go, the harder it gets. So try that one. Pretty good. So you notice when it cuts out, there's often that where it pops back in. That's what you don't really want to practice. So it's great that you only let that happen once. One more of those. Good. I'm putting you up in just the most hateful place. So we already started it in E. You could probably, if this is your very first time doing it, you would do the E to F sharp, and then work your way down at first. Give yourself some encouragement. Try the lower one. You'll notice it's so much easier. Yeah. So you notice that she was able to get so much quieter on that one. So that is the basic sensitization exercise. What you're trying to do is to get the chords to come together and stay together and do basically the least amount of muscle work that you can. So it's like you're trying, instead of like construction paper, you want like tracing paper. You want these to be very, very light. And as the air blows between them, it's creating this little vacuum from the Bernoulli effect, which we can get into in another video, that causes the chords to come together. So that is step one. Step two is a week later or 2 weeks later, after you're able to get quiet and stay there. We then go back and forth getting louder now. So you start at 1 or 0, etc. And on this one, you want to get loud on the way down. Now, this is to be waited on until you really are getting good at that first step. Try it. Right. Notice how solid you are and yet how relaxed it is. Because we started out with a really good closure, and as you add air, that really good closure is still there, as opposed to guessing for how much chord closure there should be and then guessing how much air to shove at it. You may not have the best. It's just too tight. So this is you're taking and it still has that nice velvety contact in it. Now, that is sensitization. Now, the other best thing in the world to do is head voice dragged down. Now, there are some opera teachers especially who want to teach girls to drag their head voice all the way down, and then that turns into women who are dragging their head voice all the way down, which gives you this, there's nothing, there's no power down there. So that's not really for performance. That's just people who still think that we're going to have careers in opera. This is distinctly pop musical theater land, but opera people need to have chest voice too. So what we're going to do is drag the head voice down, which is not what we would ever do in a song unless it's, for some special event. They're like, that's the character. So in head voice, try to drag head voice up there, down there. Feel how it wants to mix? Yep. Keep it. It's going to be very breathy. It's going to be very breathy, and that's fine. Good. If you're having trouble keeping it heady, ooh, the more lip you have, the headier it'll tend to be. And if you find that your lips are going blah, 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 you can always just pull your corners forward.
Oh, I just did a glottal.
That was a glottal, yeah, good! Yay, she's learning, she's learning. Very good. Good, and frankly, as low as that'll go. Now, I'm not talking about where this goes in guy keys, because typically speaking, guys don't get nodes. That's the general medical knowledge. Now, I'm sure there's some crazy cases where somebody had it as a child and they kept them on into their adult life. Or if it's a teenage boy whose voice is changing, you'll sort of see that happen. In which case, just grab a falsetto note, any falsetto he's got, and drag it down. For a guy, typically the G below middle C would be about as low as they can go. Then, after that's gone well for a little while, we try going up into the higher head voice. Again, the corners being held forward can really help here. So, oh, up there. Good. Yes, you can blow a little bit of air. Good. You can blow off as much air as you want. Good. And we're getting to flageolet mixes. Good. Now, if you're in a really healthy state and the soft nodules are almost gone, you can go on up as high as you can go. But when you're in the middle of it, I don't recommend going much above like a high A flat. We don't want strain and we don't want to push, and at that point it'll usually be cutting in and out. The things that we did with the speech adjustments and the lifestyle adjustments, things that the speech language pathologist will tell you, things like only speak at the volume that you would speak at if you had your hand on someone's shoulder. That's the volume you want to be. Don't be in smoky environments. Handle reflux. Handle any cough, handle any allergies, and sometimes that means like food allergies that are causing reflux, and it all becomes a conglomeration of things. And so vocal hygiene basically is what that is. Hydration. If you're in a desert like California, get a humidifier for God's sake. And then doing the sensitivity exercises that go quiet. Most of your time should be spent on the getting quiet one. Don't do the getting loud one until things are really, really awesome with the getting quiet one. Dragging the head voice down and then going to higher notes and head voice. Those are the best things that you can do for your voice. Now, I will say, at first when we do the head voice drag down, it's going to be breathy. Later on, you're looking for not, oh, you're instead looking for, oh. It's still very falsetto-y, but it's not so breathy. So really you're looking for a non-breathy falsetto or head voice, however you want to look at that. If you're in Nashville, you'll call it falsetto. The country folks call it falsetto. So the idea that you've got a head voice going on, at first I don't care if it's breathy or not. Once you feel like that's under control, then work for the non-breathy version of the head voice. So try the head voice drag down again and try to make it as non-breathy as you can. Right, so that tells you that she's got really good adduction and the chords are making really good, this is post-rehab. You've done the rehab.
Hey Aaron, how often should someone do these exercises?
You could do these exercises basically every day. Unlike the bodybuilding exercises, where you have to skip body parts every other day, except for the abs, because the abs can take exercise every single day. These exercises are not that strenuous on the muscles. They're primarily about sending the skin a signal that says, hey, rebuild this. We need to make this tissue more pliable, more flexible. And the idea is if you give them enough of a different experience, the body seems to wake up to that and start to change what the cords are made up of. So the toughened skin starts to become less tough. And sometimes those bumps will go away completely, sometimes they'll just reduce a little bit. But you should basically do the rehab exercises as often as you can stand to. Don't make yourself sick of them, don't get to the point where you hate it, but once a day is a great plan. And it doesn't take very long. Once a day for 10 to 15 minutes should be plenty of time. If you wanted really accelerated response. Then a couple of times a day for 10 minutes, or 3 times a day for 10 minutes, and then you can take a day off every week. That will give you an accelerated response. The more often you do it, the faster it's going to work. What's really funny is that once you've had it, though, it's very easy to trigger those lifestyle things again. It only takes, a few parties here and there, or you book a job that they want you to just kind of belt a little more than you normally are used to. That's why I'm endlessly fighting with people about don't belt so loud. Be as belty sounding as you want, but just don't do it so loudly, because then you will probably be building nodules over time. So do you notice that it's hard to stay out of those habits?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I have to make a living, and sometimes I get offered jobs that will either pay really well or could be a good opportunity to meet someone great or work with someone great or try a new venue or whatever it is. And it's hard to say no. And then once I'm in that environment, I find that my instinct is often to just revert to my old ways, my hard wiring, which is hard.
Well, as an entertainer, you want to give the people what they want.
Right.
So
yeah, and who knows, half the time these places have the strangest sound systems you've ever heard, or no sound system, or who knows what, Yeah.
Or no monitors.
Or no monitors, you can't hear yourself. And
spend your time on a good sound check. There's a big thing right there.
That does help a lot.
If you can pay anybody, if you can do any favors of any sort to get a good sound check, it really pays off in the long run.
What about singers who stay off their chords excessively to avoid getting nodes?
There's a sort of therapy voice that people will use. Basically, it's kind of taking a higher recipe, but then dragging it down to the normal speech area, so it kind of sounds like this. It's a little bit like speaking in a sigh, like, and then talking in that. There are lots of people who think you need to speak higher, like talk up here and that's healthier. No, usually that actually creates a lot of fatigue in the system. So I recommend, if someone is trying to get the swelling down in their chords, so you've done a really hard weekend of singing and you want to get the swelling down as quickly as possible, then if you can't go on voice rest, then talking in this kind of a voice will be helpful. The problem is it will tend to dry you out more too, because there's a lot more air going across the chords. But speaking in this way alone will over time create a sort of weakened situation with your chords. So you do need to go back to good, clean phonation at some point. Because if you're living in this kind of a voice, it's going to stay sort of unassembled. The chords will not be assembled. Michael Jackson, that voice that he spoke in, that's basically someone who lived in a voice therapy voice their whole life. Because when you've got that kind of pressure as a child to deliver, you better have that voice ready. You figure out a way to do that, and talking in that voice is one of the best ways to do it. Yeah. And when you sing and you sing hard, you're singing often enough, you're getting enough exercise to keep the chords in good shape. But if someone isn't singing that often, staying in that therapy voice will eventually lead to a sort of weakened system. So, I feel like that's it for today. I think we got all our points made.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's what would Aaron say about notes. Thank you so much.
Aaron says the best stuff.
So, that's the wrap up on nodules. They're not forever. They respond best to therapy. You should always try that first. And it basically is a bit of a life change for some people. So, if you think that you may have nodes, go get scoped. Go have an ENT. If you're a professional singer, you should have somebody on your team anyway who is your voice doctor, because that's your moneymaker and you want to make sure that it's in good shape. So if you notice that higher belt notes are starting to get scratchy, if you notice that singing quietly isn't going as well as it used to, if you notice that your upper head voice notes are starting to cut out on you, either you have swelling that's just swelling in that moment, or the skin is building up on you. And either way, you need to know what it is, because you may need to make some big life adjustments. And once those adjustments are made, then you can revisit how you might want to be doing the roles that you tend to do. If you're a belter, maybe there are some adjustments to your belting technique that would, in the long run, be advisable. So, that's what I have to say.
And here's a special thank you to Jeffrey, our cameraman and voice teacher, who also had lots of awesome questions. Thank you, Jeffrey.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. I had so much fun.